to Mindset Mastery with Mindset Mary. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting a woman who broke barriers and shattered ceilings in the world of television broadcasting. Joya Dass is one of the first South Asian women to grace our TV screens as a financial news anchor from the floors of the New York Stock Exchange. Joya spent 2 decades working with prestigious networks like Bloomberg, CNN, ABC, and CBS. But Joya's story does not end there. After her broadcasting career, Joya became an entrepreneur and the founder of the Women's Leadership Lab, an initiative that was born from her personal experiences and her challenges. Joya, thank you so much for being here today and welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Nice to meet you, Mary.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you. I'm very grateful to have you. So, Joya, your journey is so unique. Could you guide us through the key chapters of your story that have really sculpted you into the woman that you are today?
Yeah, I think chapter one is that my parents are immigrants. My mom is from Calcutta. My dad is from Burma. They decided to settle in the United States, specifically in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. It's white middle class America. And I think the other thing that informs my upbringing there is that I was also a product of a home of domestic violence. So from a very young age, I knew two things. One is that I was going to leave as soon as I could and never return. And two is that I wanted to be a news anchor. So I would say like the next big chapter for me was when I went to college. My parents hadn't saved for college, but they had enrolled me in a very expensive one.
Mm.
And now that I'm 50, I am past all the anger and the hurt of how they went about breaking the news to me, which is not breaking the news to me that they couldn't pay for the college. I got a rude awakening when I went to register at the registrar's office. But I negotiated with the school to figure out a way to pay for college by myself, because the only way I was moving in that direction at that time in my life was forward and not backwards. And I was out of the house. And so I negotiated a way for me to figure out how to get through college by myself. And I think the gift in that moment, once I got past the anger, is that I became a steward of my own financial life. And to this day, I know exactly down to the penny what's in my bank account. And I know where the next, check is coming from. I think that the next chapter was that I didn't know anybody in journalism at all. So I had to throw money at the problem, which meant that I needed to go to graduate school, network my ass off so that I could, meet people that were going to ultimately offer me handles into how I would get hired. Grad school at Boston University afforded me that. It got me my first 4 jobs. But then the next chapter was, okay, I want to be on TV. And at that time, which is, 1997, 1999, the trajectory was that you had to go to a small, small town. Very few eyeballs are on you so that you can make your mistakes, make a tape, and then prove that you have the druthers to be able to do this. So I, being an adventurous soul, picked Wyoming because it's someplace I probably would never live, but I saw it as an adventure. So I went to a CBS affiliate out there, spent 6 months, made a tape, but also knew that I not only wanted to be in New York, but that I only wanted to do business news. So the next chapter was me cold calling the decision maker at Bloomberg, getting a job at the floor of the New York Stock Exchange to start my training to become a news anchor in financial news. So that has really informed my last 20 years. That is what I have done. And then I realized that that personal pain point, which is that I launched myself into the world at 18 with no support, no family, I really had to throw a lot of spaghetti at the wall to see what was going to stick. And where does a small town girl from Pennsylvania get the playbook on how to handle herself in an audience of CEOs and C-level people? I didn't see the playbook out there. So I decided to formalize and create it. And that's what's given rise to my business today, which is the biggest chapter that I'm living in right now. Because for that woman that already has a big career behind her, but she wants to build a brand, or she wants to figure out how to publish thought leadership and how to show up, true to her values, I'm really teaching that by way of storytelling. And the biggest question I always get asked is, well, don't you miss journalism? And I said, well, I'm using everything I learned from journalism to be able to drive this movement today. And so that's my life.
Wow, that's incredible. And, I love I love that we have agency over the meaning that we assign to the things that happen to us. Like taking me back to your parents not putting any money aside for your education. And in that moment, it was anger, maybe frustration, resentment. But as you get older, we have the option of changing the meaning that we assign to that circumstance in our life. And being
Well, as an
able,
entrepreneur, I think you're as healthy as your business. Your business is as healthy as you are. And
Mhm.
I've done a ton of personal work. I do a ton of reading, and I follow someone by the name of Dr. Ben Hardy. And he talks about how you take the sting out of traumatic situations by really thinking about how it happened for you versus to you. And
Yeah.
I think I arrived at that conclusion long before I read his work, but it validated that I had made that paradigm switch about that time in college.
Mhm. And who would you be had you had, say, 50,000 saved for your education, right? Where you could have gone to school and not had the adversity and struggles and had to build the resilience within you to become successful. Who would you be today had there been money set aside?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge planner today, probably as a result of that transformative moment. I like to mitigate as much risk as possible ahead of time so that any variables that come up in real time, I'm able to deal with because I've tended to all of the rest. So I think that for me, I would have meticulously planned for how I was going to get through college ahead of time had I been afforded that conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. No, well, I mean, I love the career trajectory that you took and your ability to really advocate for yourself and cold call people. A lot of people have difficulty with cold calling. They don't feel comfortable cold calling. A lot of women don't feel comfortable asking for what it is that they want.
So I think this is another example of where my journalism plays in. When people ask me, don't you miss it? I said, well, journalism is all about cold calling. My first internship was at NBC Nightly News with the financial correspondent there. And he'd be like, okay, so tonight's story is going to be about somebody who has lost a ton of money today in the market. The nation is your playground. Go out and find me someone who wants to be profiled on Nightly News. In that moment, you have to go primal. You really go into your own network and think about who would connect you to somebody that fits that description. A. B is articulate. C would be willing to be on TV in short order. And D, be able to deliver inside of a few hours because your deadline in TV is always yesterday. So cold calling is part of the deal. And so it transcended well once I became an entrepreneur.
Oh, absolutely. Those skills absolutely serve you. Yeah. So then tell me in those moments where, time was not on your side and you had to go off and find someone who can fit that profile. How did that, like, how did you set yourself up to be able to make things like that happen?
I mean, that's when you really rely on the network that you build, and you have to put deposits into that network long before you actually need it. So I remember calling a small business that I had worked for while I was in high school. It was a small architectural firm, and I knew that they probably had a proclivity to get profiled on such a huge platform such as NBC Nightly News. And I knew it was a husband and wife couple with a young baby, so chances are they're saving for college. And this would be a real concern for them if their college funding for their child had suddenly dropped out because the market had crashed that day. So to me, I knew they were articulate. I knew that they could probably galvanize in short order. But that's when you really think back to your entire network that you've built, going all the way back for me at that moment to high school to figure out how I could call them.
Oh, yes. Very, very, very intelligent, very resourceful. And I agree. I think one of the best things you can do as a business owner or even just a person is cultivate the professional networks that you have. Keep putting the deposits into your personal networks and your personal relationships. And that will always serve you. That will always serve you, in whatever capacity it is that you need your network. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So then, what I'm curious back when you were doing the TV news anchor position, what were some challenges that you were facing being a woman, ethnic minority in a space where there aren't many?
People love to ask me this question. And the thing is that I was so laser focused on what I wanted to do, where I wanted to do it, and the topic I wanted to cover that I think that my ethnicity was moot. I am and very, very good at being on TV and talking about the markets and getting out inside of 2 minutes. So I don't think that my ethnicity, because I was in such a niche business, necessarily posed any obstacles for me. I think the bigger obstacle, like I said, that eventually informed my business is that now all of a sudden I'm on the trading floor interviewing CEOs and titans of business. And there is a very finite amount of time where you are just making small talk until the camera turns on and we're out of the commercial break. And I think for me, because I had just ejected myself out of my family dynamic and had made my way in the world by myself, I really just didn't have handles on what you start to talk to people about. Okay. So I often tell this story that I took myself to a Glenlivet Scotch tasting where a guy in a kilt had a map of Scotland, and he explained how Scotch is formed, the taste and the tone and timbre of each Scotch is really formed by what part of the country it's from. And I figured out like another handle by which I was going to engage my mostly male older counterparts by developing a love of Scotch and eventually a love of cigars. Because who wants to just talk about work the entire time? You want to be interesting. And so I think my lesson that I learned is that you can't, in order to have people be interested, you have to be interesting. And that's something I had to learn by myself, but something that I espouse today is that I watch, I mimic, I iterate, I learn, I put it to use. So I just watched people around me, what they were doing. I was like, okay, people here on Wall Street love to drink Scotch and smoke cigars. I'm going to go teach myself about it.
Oh my goodness, that's great. Yeah. And I also think that like people experience what they focus on, right? Like earlier I had asked you about the question about, being ethnic minority, being a woman. And I think that if that's what we focus on, then maybe we will create narratives or circumstances where we say, oh, it's because of this that happened. And yet you are so laser focused on your dream, what you wanted to create, what you wanted to become, that you found ways to create connections with the people that are in that dream, that are currently in that dream, living that dream, creating that dream. So that's actually great awareness for our viewers, which is if you want to be in the room, read the room. Try to understand who's in the room. What do those people like? And how can you connect with them based on their interests, but also shared interests? Yeah, no, that's wonderful. So then, Joya, take me to where you are today. Today, you are the founder of the Women's Leadership Lab. So what got you to the point where you felt like you needed to build something like this?
2010, my contract with Channel 7, which is ABC here in New York, had come up. And at that point, I was at the 10-year mark of my career. And I thought to myself, if I was on my deathbed, would I be proud of the body of work I'd created? Now, you have to know that what I do is morning news and I do business news. So I'm not creating any body of work. I'm just on TV every hour submitting what the markets are doing. So I thought to myself, well, I want to create a body of work that I'd be proud of. So I started a documentary production company because unlike morning news, it's longer, it's not 2 minutes. I would have time to go back and revise it and make it beautiful. And it's something that would stand the test of time. So I had taken on a business partner who had been hosting for some time now, for many years, something called Lady Drinks in Toronto. And Lady Drinks was a way for women in film and TV to come together every month for a meetup and network to get jobs, get babysitting, forge relationships, so on and so forth. So when she moved to New York and we started our documentary production company together, because I was still on the air, I did need a partner who was going to do business development. She said, why don't we start Lady Drinks meetups in New York? And the very first event had 8 people. Then there were 40 people. Then there were 300 people coming through the door. And guess what ethnicity they were? Indian. What I had not realized, and these women were articulating to me, is that a whole generation of women had grown up watching me on TV at a time when no Indian women were on television. And I sounded like them. I looked like them. I didn't speak with an accent. I clearly had a proficient sort of handle of the topic I was talking about. And that was groundbreaking for them. So they were coming to share that they were now doing something other than the Indian parent approved doctor, lawyer, engineer. And I realized that I was in a place of responsibility, whether I liked it or not. But this was just the first time I'd been taken down from behind the TV screen and made accessible. I had no idea that this was all percolating in the background. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do what I do on television, which is to continue to interview titans of business, but let's do it in service of this audience that is building something and could really benefit from the business acumen. And so that's what really gave rise to my business. I've evolved tremendously since those early days. Now it is a business mastermind. And one of the things that differentiates me from anybody else who's out there doing leadership programming is that I lead with a big element of adventure. It's one of my top values. I didn't learn that until I went and enrolled in a mastermind of my own. But it's something that really informs the curriculum as I put it together every single year for my mastermind.
Oh, wow. So then tell me, Joya, what does adventure look like in your mastermind?
So next year, my mastermind, which is now being enrolled, I'm enrolling the 2024 year class. There's only 8 women, but I've already planned Nice, France. Starting this year, I've decided that I'm not just going to go to a country for 2 weeks or 10 days like Americans typically do. I'm actually going to do a month, 2 months. And I started that tradition this year. So I have my apartment booked in Nice, France for 2 months. But the retreat will be 3 days, 2 nights for the folks that are going. And I think the biggest piece of adventure that I'm inserting into their curriculum is I love boats. I know you love boats as well.
I do.
We're going to take a boat from Nice to Cannes, where there is a stunning underwater museum. And there is a huge art installation underneath. And so we're going to, the very last night, go out and sail into the Cannes harbor. And then we're going to go and snorkel and visit this underwater museum.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. And that's definitely a twist on masterminds. Sign me up. So
Yeah,
then
well, you're welcome to. Like I said, I'm enrolling the 2024 class.
Nice, France. I mean, it's hard to say no to Nice.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, I've never thought about adventure because I think I talked to you before we started our call. Like, I'm not a super adventurous person, but I'm actually curious what adventure can give someone that's in a business mastermind.
First, I'll explain why I think adventure informs so much of my life. I grew up in a very traditional Indian household where the common word I heard was no.
Mm.
And because I was also a girl. And so my parents were just afraid of everything. So I couldn't go for ice cream with my friends, and I couldn't go to the movies, and I couldn't go to sleepover birthday parties because they didn't know who, know the parents. And so as an adult, I think the pendulum swung completely the opposite direction, where I want to do everything, try everything, see everything. If I died, doing an adventure, I'd be completely happy. But I've also, I've been on my own adventure from a very young age. And I see how if you're lost, if you're on the wrong path, you're getting immediate feedback on that. There's an immediate feedback loop. Also, if you have to make quick decisions, guess what you have to do when you're in leadership? You've got to be able to pivot fast and make a different decision. I also think that there's the importance of teamwork. Nothing else is ever going to teach you the bigger importance of teamwork than getting 30 people across the ocean for a 7-day sail of the Dalmatian, of the Dalmatian coast, which is what I did 2 years ago. It also means that I have to be a tremendous communicator and over communicate often, make sure it's very clear so there's no misunderstanding as to where this boat is moored and how you're going to access it. So I think that, adventure just amplifies in very short order something that you might realize over a very long period of time, especially when you're lost, especially when you realize how someone handles money, especially when you realize how someone handles stress.
Wow. Yes. I would agree. I would agree. Certainly, I've never taken that perspective, but you're absolutely right. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And it helps us get out of our comfort zone, right? Like, how many of us are stuck in analysis paralysis or inaction because we are in our head and we're afraid to take that first move, or we're waiting for
Well, you're
perfection.
waiting for permission, right? You're waiting for someone to give you permission to say it's okay for you to do that. So that's what I find most women are doing. And
Wow.
it's not your fault, right? You were conditioned to seek permission. That makes you a good girl in society's eyes. But the fact of the matter is that, I mean, we're not living in the 1920s. We're not even living in the 1970s where you need your husband to go take you to the bank so that you can get a bank account, right? We have the ability. Everything's sort of at our fingertips. We just have to give ourselves permission. So I'm a huge fan of taking people out of their comfort zone. And I learned it on that first production where I took a film crew of guys to India, to a part of India they'd never been to. And I know that after 8 weeks on the ground, those were not the same guys that came back as the ones that had boarded the plane at JFK, a month and a half before. I saw how they had changed in their relation to each other. how they change in their relationship to themselves. And that was my first inkling that there was something in this about adventure.
Yeah. Yeah. So adventure equals or can become transformation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you let it. Some people do a very sanitary travel experience. I'm reading a great book by Craig Storty called Why Travel Matters. And he talks about Thomas Cook, who ushered in the era of what he calls tourism versus travel.
Mm.
Now you can take a very sanitized, safe trip to Spain with a group of people that are going to take you to hotel restaurants and take you to a flamenco performance. And, maybe you'll see a church or two and then you get on a plane and come back. But if you never truly immerse with the locals, if you don't truly sort of do something where you're traveling versus touring,
Yeah.
then was that even a moment for you to transform who you are? Absolutely not. And trust me, I used to take those trips in the very beginning because I didn't know how else to. But now, I'm carving out and doing my own research to figure out how to get there. But one of my favorite things to do in each country is to do a mastermind dinner with the local women where everybody puts a challenge to the table. And as a group, we crowdsource solutions. And at
Oh,
that moment, whether or not you are from Marrakesh, whether you are from Turkey, whether you are from Montreal, whether you are Moroccan living in Montreal, you're all on the same equal plane and you're offering solutions to one another. And so for me, that's the way that I immerse versus go and tour.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. I really get to know the people, really get to know the culture, and then really get to know yourself.
Yeah.
That's very nice. And so the women in the Women's Leadership Lab, tell me about, you've been doing this at least for, I believe, for over a decade now, right?
Yeah. It was 11 years this past July.
Wow, congrats on that. That's
Yeah.
amazing. And I'm sure that the membership has been growing steadily as the years go on. Tell me about what it's like to be part of that leadership lab. What is it like
Uh,
for
I think I think over the 11 years, I've really drilled down and become very clear, much like I did when I first started out in television, who I want to serve.
women?
So that person is probably between the ages of 35 and 55. There's somebody who invests in their personal development and believes in investing in their personal development, has a track record of doing it. Somebody with a growth mindset. You're not going to go off on a boat to Turkey with me if you don't have a growth mindset and don't embrace the idea of learning. And I'm always curious to know what you consume in the way of media, podcasts, books, articles. Like when you are speaking in a forum that I've built, how are you going to be adding value if you aren't a large consumer of information yourself?
Oh, oh,
I'm also looking for somebody who can hold their own in the sandboxes that I build. When I call on you, are you going to offer a solution or are you just going to sit back and observe passively? If you're the latter, then chances are you're not going to be a part of my platform because I very much built it where I want to hear from the quietest person in the room and I want to hear from the loudest person in the room. And so sometimes I have women who say, well, I just want to come and observe. I'm like, well, then I don't think that you are for my platform because I need people that want to contribute. You are not there just to take. And
yeah.
so that comes to my last point where like you actually believe in the power of the collective. You believe in giving and taking. And if you have resources that you are more than willing to share them, you're not going to hold them close to your chest and, fear for your life that someone's going to take them from you.
Yeah, yeah. When I've spent well, when I was on my cruise vacation this summer, I've spent many days sort of just sitting on the ship and reading this book by Joe Polish called "What's in It for Them,"
Yeah.
and it's really a book. I don't know if you've looked into his work, but it's really just about coming into relationships, thinking about the needs of the other party, the needs of the other person, right? So it's very much about service and what can you contribute, what can you give, and I think that when we give and we give selflessly, I think that there is the law of reciprocity, like it will come back, and if it doesn't come back from that person, it comes back in another form. But to kind of lead with your heart and give without the expectations of getting anything in return, I think that's something that I personally value and like to live by, because if I can create opportunities for others, naturally their opportunities will flow back around to me when it's time. But that's really beautiful. And I like the fact that you're actually looking for people in terms of like, what are you consuming? Because it's our environment really dictates how we flourish and where we flourish. And it's like the consumption of someone who has a growth mindset and is growth oriented and is always looking to learn from others, and it's always open to differences of opinion. And it's our ability to really not be stuck in our own beliefs or in our own paradigms and perspectives of the world. And I think that the more we can contribute and share our worldview with others, the more we just learn from one another and grow collectively.
Yes, all of the above. I'm familiar with Joe Polish's work. I was actually just my mind went off to thinking about, because Dr. Ben Hardy, like I said, I follow him,
Yes.
cites him a lot, and I think I listen to him on audiobooks, and so I'm familiar with his work. But it's surprising to me how many times women will reach out and be like, "So what are you going to do for me?"
Mm.
I'm like, well, that's really not the ethos with which I lead. And it's certainly not the ethos that espouses my platform. So I'm not sure this is a fit.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I love Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I think he gave a talk to us in one of the programs that I'm in, and it's like it was the 10x is easier than
Versus 2x.
Yeah, and I love that concept because like it completely flips on its head this idea that we always think 10x is 10 times harder, right? Like it's harder to get to 10x, but really it's hard to stay in 2x. I think it's harder to stay in 2x than to realign your goals and your efforts and your actions towards the 10x, which is really where you really want to be, right?
Well, 10x requires you to completely have whole new systems and whole new processes for how you're going to get to that goal.
Mhm.
To cite Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here is Not Going to Get You There.
Mhm.
And so 2x is just doing more activity to basically stay in the same place and run in place. But
Yeah.
10x means that goal has to be impossible. So impossible that you're going to have to come up with a whole new set of systems and processes in order to be able to get to it.
Yeah.
So, for example, my business coach and I just formulated what is a $100,000 package for a specific client for next year. And we've mapped out what the bells and whistles of that be, what the time commitment would be, where we would host it. And now I've created the vacuum. Every problem has a solution. Everything in this universe has polarity. I've created the vacuum and someone's going to fill it. Someone's going to take it. But if you had told me even probably 2 years ago that I was going to build a package that was $100,000, I would have been like, you're crazy. That's so much money. That's like one person's salary for the year. But I have done so much work on my mindset that I can fathom and ideate around that. But it also meant that I had to do business a totally different way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thinking about the 2x and the 10x, it's like if you want to build $100,000 program or mastermind, it's like who do you need to become today in order to have that in the future, right? Like because we're always thinking about like, well, sometimes we're thinking like, oh, I can't build that or nobody would come for that. But then it comes to like, it always comes back to like our identity of who we think we are and our value. What do we think we're worth? Right. And 2 years ago, maybe you wouldn't have been in a position where you felt like that was an achievable goal. But I think that's why there's so much power in personal development, in a growth mindset, because although you're not there yet, you're actively working on yourself to actually get to the position where you say, yeah, I do have $100,000 mastermind and I can provide this value. And you have
I
to.
mean, Tony Robbins talks a lot about identity. Dr. Ben Hardy wrote a book called Personality Isn't Permanent, which is all about identity. And what is identity really? It's your story, the story that you're telling others, the story you're telling yourself, and your standards. And so rather than raise the ceiling, which is, part of thinking about impossible things, but it's also raising the floor. Like, what will you tolerate? What won't you tolerate? What are you putting up with that you will no longer put up with? And what stories are you going to leave behind so that you can become that next version of you that this impossible goal is going to demand? And so I spend a lot of time thinking about that. In fact, I journal every morning from the position of my future self, because my future self is making decisions in a very different way than my current self is.
Yeah, that's beautiful actually, to be able to journal from the position of your future self, because it also gives us permission to say things and think things that maybe don't necessarily reflect our current reality, but we give ourselves permission to do that because it's part of our ability to envision and dream who we're becoming, right? And the best way to bring in that future is to find a way to get it into our present moment. And I think journaling is a really, really great way, an exercise to be able to play in the future, or play that role that we see ourselves in that future. So tell me about, like, I love the fact that you're so much into personal development, because I think I'm basically personal development obsessed. and I think, like, it's great to learn, but at the same time, when you acquire all that knowledge and information, what's even more important is to apply what you've learned, right? Like, how does this new piece of information serve me in my current life? How is it going to change something? And whether it's my up-leveling my thinking, bettering my relationships, creating better processes, improving my business, like how am I going to use this information to bring my life forward? So I want to talk to you about the Women's Leadership Lab and people that come into the Women's Leadership Lab. You've had so much experience engaging and collaborating and connecting with people. When you look at, like, women just in general, where do you see similarities in terms of limiting beliefs that are holding back a lot of women? Like, what would you say are, like, the top 3 limiting beliefs that women believe about themselves that isn't necessarily true?
I just did an event this past weekend, and one of the top things that comes back again and again is, how do I charge my value in the market? How do I stop giving away things for free? And that cycles back to society really rewarding us for being good girls, for being nice people, for not rocking the boat too much. And if you've been conditioned to just sort of be seen and not heard, then imagine going out and advocating for yourself that you're going to charge X, whereas you used to charge nothing before. So I think that we're really at the precipice of a big change where people are starting to ask, women are starting to ask, how can I charge my worth? But aren't really sure how they bridge the gap from where they are to charging that number. I think that's number 1. Number 2 is really having scripts to set up boundaries. I can't do that, or I won't be able to do that for you right now. I think that Gen Z and maybe even the next generation is very adept at saying, I'm not comfortable with, or I can't, very good at holding the boundary. But I don't think that my parents' generation or even my generation is very good at saying I can't, or that no is a complete sentence. They'll more often than not do something to their own detriment, as opposed to really pausing, saying, I don't think this actually fits with my goal, so I'm going to say no, and I don't need to justify it.
Right.
That's it. Like this morning, my boyfriend asked me something. He's like, so what's the reason you're going to give? I said, I'm not going to give a reason. My reason is that I'm just not going. And that's it. So I think boundaries and having scripts to gracefully set a boundary is probably a second one. And then the third thing, I think, goes back to the idea of permission. So many are just waiting for somebody to give them permission to do X. So many are just waiting for permission to do Y. They have to ask their husband, they have to ask their kid, they have to ask their mother, they have to ask their mother-in-law, they have to ask, 15 different stakeholders, when in fact it's the person that's really holding you back is yourself. And so again, that's easier said than done. So then what are the steps you actually need to take in order to bridge that gap? So I have a different journaling habit in the morning versus when I'm journaling at night. And I had to do this because I saw those gaps and I needed to figure out how to fix it. And so at night, I do 2 things. One is that I go back through my day, and it could be just bullet points, but I just recap my day. And there are moments where I do what Tony Robbins likes to call positive stacking, because we as human beings are primed to do negative stacking, because thousands of years ago, it was the difference between us hunting the lion or getting eaten by the lion, right? We are primed to pattern match for fear and for threats. However, then that also means that we have to be very intentional about stacking for the positive stuff in our lives. And so for me at that moment when I'm journaling at night is like, hey, I'm proud of you for saving money and taking the subway as opposed to burning $30 on an Uber. Or I'm proud of you for making this decision to, wear a raincoat today because you know it's going to be raining by 6 o'clock, even though you're going to be at your desk at 8 o'clock. So, it seems really stupid, simple things, but just really being proud of myself for the little things is that positive stacking. The other thing is that I know I have an opportunity to rewire my subconscious. And so I have recorded my own affirmations into the Think Up app. And I listen to that as I'm drifting off to sleep. And why that is key is that as you're drifting off to sleep, your brain goes into something called the theta state. And in the theta state is when your brain is most malleable, your subconscious is most malleable, and you're able to rewire a lot of those messages that you probably internalized as a 5 or 6 year old about money, about relationships, about stuff. And this is when you're able to kind of start to make change in a critical way. And that, if you commit to it every day, starts to have a compounding effect. So I remember walking past the Chanel store on Friday, and I remember very clearly hearing a voice in my head, oh, I couldn't afford that. And now I walk past the Chanel store and I say, I could afford that. I actually might go into the store and take a look at that. I may not purchase it until December when it's my birthday, but I can afford that. And that
Mm.
didn't happen overnight. That happened from really, really being intentional about all of the things I just talked about.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, I'm not a journaler, but I think I need to start becoming one because you and so many people that I've talked to have really talked about the benefits and the rewiring that actually does happen when you're able to journal, get your thoughts out on paper, and then, do that consistently over time. Yeah, there does have a compounding effect for sure.
And
Oh,
think
that's
about it, just all that stuff, if you're in a bad mood or you're having a bad moment, all that stuff is just like swimming around in your body. If you've ever read The Power of Positive Thinking, they did experiments in the book where they had people shout at like a petri dish full of water and then say loving, kind words to a dish of water, and the molecular structure changed. So why wouldn't you, if you know the way to bring yourself back to peace, would you miss out on an opportunity to get your stuff out on paper and go to a place where you can say loving and kind things to yourself?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think that, like, of course, awareness is step number one, right? Like getting aware of the things that are floating around in our heads that we're not able to release. But I think that, like, when you get them out on paper, I think it loses its charge on you because you've been able to take it out of your mind and put it onto something physical. And then I think that we process like if thinking something gives you one level of awareness, I think writing it down gives you the next level of awareness, right? Like the more, like, it's like coaching, you can keep thinking about your problems, but once you talk to someone about it, you start realizing things that you've been thinking that you were completely unaware of because it is in your subconscious mind. So rewiring that subconscious is key, is really, really key, because that's really what's running our programming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
95% of our lives are run by our subconscious, and only 5% is true willpower. So if those are the odds, you're already in a lose-lose situation if you think that you're going to win out over your subconscious mind. And that's just like, a teacher said something to you when you were 7, and you're still punting from that baseline of, well, I really can't do that because my teacher said I could, wasn't good at it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I mean, this comes from years of reading, shedding light on all of this, and then understanding that there are ways to change it. It's not a lost cause.
Oh, yeah, no, not at all. Not at all. And I guess I'm curious, eh, aside from journaling, how else do you build an awareness around your thoughts and your emotions?
Uh, I am a huge fan of taking quiet time each day by myself. And I mentioned that I was a month in Paris this past year. That was like an amazing self retreat. And if I didn't come out of that month on the other side with an amazing amount of self awareness, I don't know what else would. So I think that we are a society that loves to do.
Mm.
Um, it's almost a badge of honor to walk around saying, I'm so busy. Oh, I'm so busy. I'm so busy. But I have actively been putting more white space into my calendar so that I can have those little moments of silent retreat, because I think that that's what builds the self-awareness muscle the most. I did a month this past year. I'm going to do 2 months next year, because I reaped the benefits. There's a business benefit to that. I ended up having a 5-figure month from the residual of all that joy and introspection that I had in that month in Paris. Um, And I don't think that I get that in my day to day, especially living in New York where the ions are charged for anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
charged for people to be, going 50 different directions at any given time and being rewarded for it.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's being rewarded for doing the things that are just going to get you further behind on who you're actually trying to become. And I think one of the things with my coaching clients is like there's a lack of clarity of like what is it that you actually like, what are you working towards? What do you see in your future? What is your definition of success? Like what does success look like to you? Tell me about like what does a perfect day look like? What would you be doing? How would you be feeling? Who's around you? What would you experience? And because life is so busy, because our schedules are overprogrammed, we don't even know anymore.
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions that I journal on each day, sometimes when I'm sort of struggling to journal, is like, what do I want?
Mm.
And even if you just ask yourself that question every single day, you'll start to see a pattern. And for me, my pattern started all the way back when I started my documentary production company, which is that, yes, I wanted a body of work, but I also wanted to be and see and travel the world. And so today, when I think about what do I want, it's that I want to travel the world. And that's consistently why I work as hard as I do. It's why I'm building the package that I am. And that's why I built the business that I've built. It enables me to see the world, because I've tethered both work and travel together.
Mm-hmm. And what's beautiful is you found a way to take the two things that you love and put them together and create an experience and create a business on the foundation of the things that you're actually very, very passionate about.
Yeah.
Journalism, helping people, helping women, giving adventures. And I was listening to this podcast and it was talking about like every experience in your life is like a dot, a dot, a dot. But what happens with time is you can look back and you can actually connect the dots of why you had those experiences and how they're actually serving you in your present moment. And I think that's beautiful because when we're in it, it's more like tunnel vision, like we're in it, we don't really see how this is going to connect to what we want or our future. We don't see the connection. But when it's in
Yeah.
hindsight, you really see like, oh wow, I had those experiences had to happen for me to be where I am today.
I mean, this really speaks to a lot of the work that I do with my women leaders. I worked with a woman in Montreal actually earlier this year who went from the fintech space to the climate tech space. And she was really having a hard time connecting her former avatar to her current avatar. She had an inkling of an idea of what she wanted to do, but she wasn't sure. And so I have this exercise that I do with clients where I actually take you through your entire life story starting at 14 years old and break down your life in 3-year increments, list out the most important events that happened in each of those 3-year buckets, and start to theme them. And then once you've dumped the entire proverbial purse out onto the table and taken me all the way through your current age and 3 years past that, what were the big pivotal moments and what did they all have in common? Now, I can't say that this is my original exercise. I did work with a woman named Elizabeth Cross in Nashville. She had hosted a workshop for my women's leadership lab, and it was an exercise that she did. But I found it so fascinating because when I did that exercise, I realized that my third and my most important value behind adventure and beauty was freedom. And every time I made a huge pivotal change, leaving my home, uh, leaving journalism, even fashioning all these adventures. Freedom is such a huge thing that informed all the big decisions I've made in my life. And it wasn't until I did that exercise could I find that connecting dot, as you just talked about. So I do this with my clients today because that connecting dot comes from that deep dive. But most people think it should just, oh, I should just like know it, shouldn't I? No, it comes from doing this brand of work, and I'm happy to usher you and be the steward through it.
Yeah. And would you agree, or I'm open to your opinion on like, we're constantly in search of freedom, but it's really deep down, it's the freedom to just come back and have the permission or give ourselves permission to just kind of come back home to ourselves.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
also think freedom looks like a lot of things. I mean, for me, my freedom comes from the partner that I chose. He is, I don't know if I give him enough credit for the fact that he's like, oh, you're going to go to France for 2 months. Okay, great. Now if I was being irresponsible and I wasn't working while I was there, I think he'd have something to say about it. But he knows that I'm responsible that way and that adventure is a huge piece of who I am and never says no to me. So I think that freedom is also created by the people that you allow into your weird little world.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's also, it's created through the support that you get from the people who want to see you get that sense of freedom and feel freedom and create freedom for yourself and create it for others too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. So, the last question I wanted to talk to you about was about branding and storytelling. I know that you're big on storytelling, and I think that you're an amazing storyteller because you have the courage to talk about your past, talk about the things that were difficult in your past. And I think that that's what really creates connection between people, right? Like if you show me that you're vulnerable, I'm going to find a way to connect with you because at the end of the day, I think we're all vulnerable, but not everybody's willing to share that vulnerability. So tell me how storytelling has really helps women and people, entrepreneurs in how they brand themselves and set themselves apart from somebody else.
I think that people think that public speaking is all about confidence, and I always argue that it's about courage. So I want to share an example of a woman I was coaching. She was interviewing for jobs. She had been out of work quite some time, and she just could not get past the first interview, the first round of interviews. So she decided to invest in herself and work with me. And what I was teaching was storytelling. And she was really telling me like the safe sanitary stories that she needed to tell me at the very beginning. I would say we were about 4 weeks into class before finally something broke. And she finally shared a story of a time that she'd been rendered homeless. Her family owned a motel. Through a series of unfortunate events, the family lived on premise. They lost the motel and they also lost their home. And she was a teenager at the time. And she concluded her story, because I always encourage everybody to share the learning from having gone through that experience. And she's like, I think that most people think at that moment in time you want charity. But I, as a teenager who was trying to go to school, trying to put food on the table, trying to be stable, wanted options. And something shifted for her in the weeks subsequent. She started to make her way through round 1 and round 2 of her interviews. And then once we concluded the class just a few weeks later, she's like, hey, Joy, I got a job. The drought had ended. She'd gotten a job, and it was sort of 15% pay bump over her previous position, which she'd had many years prior. And so I asked her, I said, so what do you think changed? What was happening in those interviews that wasn't happening before? She's like, I was showing up more authentically me because of what you really drove home during class. I wasn't telling the safe sanitary stories anymore. I was being more authentically me. She's like, number 2, I'd become a better advocate for myself. Before the interview concluded, I would ask for the next step. I would ask for the next interview. And she's like, and by number 3, she's like, I realized that what I wanted at the beginning of my class and in working with you, Joya, it was not what I wanted by the end of working with you. And so you had shepherded me through really getting clarity on what it is that I wanted. And I think that's what landed me the job that I have today. So I think that illustrates the answer to your question, why storytelling has so many applications in business, but only if you allow yourself the courage to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. It is about courage, 100%. Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Joya. This was such a great interview. Now, I am sure my listeners are going to want to know more about you. They're going to want to follow you. They might want some information on your mastermind. Where's the best place that they can go to connect with you?
Yeah, I on all of my social media, and my website it's Joya Dass, JoyaDass. So that's my handle on Twitter, that's my handle on Instagram, and that is my website as well. So you can always get a hold of me at joyadass.com or through any of my social media properties.
Wonderful. Well, please go there to follow Joya and follow her work and all her adventures. Joya, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show today.
Thank you.
Take care.